Some of the friendliest toys in Poppy Playtime may have never died at all. Hidden chapter details, strange animations, and overlooked scenes all point to one thing: survival. And the deeper we dig, the more truth starts to show. Let's start with one of the most surprising cases. You're probably thinking Doey's definitely gone for good, and honestly it looked that way, but one key detail changes everything. His body was never touched. While other bosses were dragged off by the prototype in Chapter 2 and 3, Doey's remains were left exactly where we saw him last. That's not just strange, it's a clue. And let's not forget, when we supposedly took Doey out with the chainsaws, he reappeared just 2 minutes later, looking completely unscathed. That's likely due to how he was created. Unlike the other bigger bodies, Doey's experiment used 3 different test subjects instead of just 1, meaning he contained far more biological material, such as veins and nerves, than any of the others. His entire form was packed with regenerative dough that also held another unique ability.
Even a simple misregulation of emotions means we have 900 pounds of dough that can shift however it pleases.
Did you catch that? Doey had the ability to shift his body however he wanted. We saw glimpses of it throughout Chapter 4, but this detail explains everything. How he transformed into his monstrous form, and more importantly, how he came back after being sawed multiple times. And considering there's no clear sign that Doey contains any organic parts, it's likely he was brought back to life entirely by the poppy flower, believed to hold life-altering properties. That makes one thing clear: Doey is practically unstoppable. If he can regain control over his emotions when he inevitably springs back to life, he might actually become one of our allies again. And based on some interesting clues, the same might even be true for Ollie. Now, sure, the voice we heard helping us in Chapter 3 and 4 turned out to be the prototype mimicking a child, but Ollie was real once.
Was there ever an Ollie?
Yes, there was.
But that was a very long time ago.
So, who exactly was Ollie before everything changed? Well, thanks to some hidden content from Chapter 3, I think I have the answer. If you go out of bounds in the Playcare map, there's a sign that reads Ollie's Room, confirming that, like most of the other children we've encountered in this franchise, Ollie was an orphan living at Playcare while the factory was still operational. But that brings us to a bigger question. Where are those orphans now? According to Poppy, they're not dead. They've been kept in Playtime Co.'s labs, still very much alive. And it's safe to say that she wasn't lying about this, considering Catnap also implied the orphan's survival in a Chapter 3 VHS tape. Theoretically, that means Ollie should be there in the labs with them, but there's one major problem. The prototype is the one taking care of them. If Ollie was to be killed, the prototype would know, and based on what he reveals in his conversation with Poppy at the end of Chapter 4, it's clear that he's aware of Ollie's fate, which doesn't seem to be a nice one. There's one thing we must not forget, though. The prototype is a master manipulator. He lies, deceives, and tricks others to serve his own agenda. Remember, he convinced all the toys that they would be set free before the Hour of Joy, only to betray them. He even killed his most loyal follower, Catnap. So when he claimed that Ollie was dead, was he really telling the truth? Or was it just another calculated move? It's entirely possible the prototype said this just to break Poppy's spirit, to make her completely hopeless. If he could convince her that her oldest friend was gone for good, she might lose sight of her plan to destroy him and the factory. After all, what's the point of fighting if there's nothing left to fight for? But in reality, Ollie might not be gone at all, especially considering that a Chapter 4 VHS tape showed the real Ollie comforting Poppy long ago. It almost feels like more build-up to his character. Now, let's talk about Hoppy Hopscotch, a character who hasn't appeared in the game directly, but was teased in a Chapter 4 VHS tape and still has a chance to show up in the future.
I'll find more food for you to bring up to Playcare when you're ready.
Thanks, Doey. Sorry we lost the supplies. It won't happen again.
It's clear that Hoppy was once a close friend of Doey's and a member of the Safe Haven group, the very team we joined forces with in Chapter 4, but the issue is that there's actually a hidden message in one of Chapter 4's documents which reveals that Hoppy didn't make it. In fact, she perished not long before the player even arrived. At first glance, this might seem to rule out any chance of her showing up in the future. However, the orientation notebook suggests something interesting. There are multiple bigger body versions of each smiling critter. critter. So while one Hoppy Hopscotch may have fallen, that doesn't mean there aren't other versions still out there. The real question is, would those other Hoppies share the same loyalty as the one Doey knew, or would they end up being something far more unpredictable? For now, all we can do is wait and see. Next up, we have DogDay. Now, despite his incredibly disturbing death scene, there's actually a good chance he's not gone for good, and the reason becomes clear when you look at the evidence. For starters, DogDay was tough. He literally had his legs ripped off and was left hanging in a cell for who knows how long, yet somehow he managed to survive until we found him. That alone shows just how resilient he really was, but the most convincing evidence? We never actually saw DogDay die. Sure, we did witness the mini critters crawling inside him, using his body like a suit to chase us down, but throughout that entire sequence, DogDay was still alive. The gagging noises he made during the chase scene confirm that much. Plus, when we finally made it to safety at the elevator, there was no sign of DogDay meeting his end for good. The final scream we heard? It was probably just the critters expressing their frustration after failing to take us down. With all this in mind, there's a real possibility that DogDay managed to get help from other docile toys and could even reunite with us in Chapter 5, this time as an ally ready to help us take down the prototype. And finally, we have everyone's favorite furball, Kissy Missy. Right now, a lot of people think she's gone for good, but that couldn't be further from the truth. Now, don't get me wrong, it didn't exactly end well for Kissy. Chapter 4 wrapped up with Poppy fleeing in terror, leaving us and Kissy alone to face the prototype's wrath. He blew up the ground beneath us, and though Kissy managed to grab onto us, the strain was far too much. Her arm gave out, tearing right off. Not only is Kissy now incredibly vulnerable, but there's also a real chance the prototype captured her right after we plummeted into the caves. If not, she could be struggling to survive, possibly even dying from blood loss after losing her arm. However, we can likely rule that out. When we caught a glimpse of her severed arm as we fell, there was no blood to be seen, just stuffing. And even if the prototype is lurking nearby, Kissy might still be able to hold her own. She's clearly much stronger than she seems. After all, she effortlessly smacked employees around during the Hour of Joy, plus she survived her ambush at the end of Chapter 3, meaning she must have been able to fight off her attacker. Now, believe it or not, Kissy's hidden strength actually makes perfect sense. Huggy Wuggy Experiment 1170 was specifically designed for immense strength due to his role as a security measure. Kissy, created just 2 experiments later as his literal female counterpart, was likely built with the same level of power. Their nearly identical builds only reinforce this idea. Simply put, Kissy is probably more than capable of defending herself, meaning there's a good chance she'll survive just fine until we cross paths with her again in Chapter 5. Do you think any of these toys are still alive? Let me know your theories in the comments. Also, subscribe if you love your mom.